Hey everybody, what's up? It's Chase. Welcome to another episode of the Chase Jarvis live show here on Creative Live. You know this show. This is where I sit down with amazing humans and I do everything I can to unpack their brains with the goal of helping you live your dreams in career, in hobby, and in life. My guest today is a world-renowned outdoor adventure sports photographer and filmmaker and author, and we're here to celebrate, among many things, our friendship, his illustrious career, and his new book, Stories Behind the Images. My guest today is the inimitable Mr. Corey Rich. In the house.
Thanks, Chase. Yeah,
all the way from Tahoe this morning. Thank you for coming.
My pleasure. My pleasure. It's I love talking. I love telling stories. I love hearing stories, and that was really the spirit of this book. And any opportunity to talk about the book, which really means kind of paying it forward with stories and lessons.
Stories and lessons, and you know, having consumed it, there are so many stories that tug on my heartstrings as a lifelong photographer. We've come up at similar times through really similar trajectory, but it's also so widely applicable. These are lessons about life, not just adventure sports photography. And so, A, congratulations.
Thank you.
B, on your comment about love talking and sharing stories, we already had a 1 hour conversation on the couch before we even started rolling. We're like, we've got to stop talking and start the cameras rolling. So we're happy to be actually live in front of the cameras now. Are we doing an Instagram thing too? What's up, Instagram? If maybe at some point we'll even interrupt. If there are some questions, we will let you chime into the episode. But without further ado, welcome to Seattle. Thanks for coming up.
Yeah, it's the first time I've flown up to Seattle, Chase, where it's actually overcast. And I almost sent out a group text to all of my Seattle buddies that always claim it's blue skies every day. Because it finally validated that, okay, occasionally it is overcast and raining.
It's the flip of what everybody else thinks it is. And so we have the control over that as a little switch that coming in today. And I don't want to make it too sweet, but it occasionally is cloudy in Seattle. This is true.
I do remember, Chase, and it might be, I don't know if I have no sense of time. It could have been 20 years ago. It could have been 25 years ago. But coming up to Seattle.
Wait, I'm more than 25 years old?
Well, let's see. If you're 26.
It's true.
But
29, actually, perpetually 29.
It's something that happened in putting this book together is I realized I have no sense of time, and everything was a few years ago. That's how I would reference it. It was a few years ago. But walking into this building, and as we sat on that couch, it reminded me, I came to Seattle, and I remember it was a sunny day. It was like beautiful blue skies, and I was staying at a buddy's house on a lake. I don't remember what the lake is called. And everyone was outside, like tanning in the park.
With tinfoil around them.
Yes, literally. And everyone was pale, but they were laying there just getting burned in the sun.
Sounds like Seattle in the summer.
And then we walked into your office. You had a tiny office on this lake or just off the lake. And I walked into the back and you had your feet up on the table. And maybe we knew each other's names, but I remember you had a glowing, humming Red Bull cooler in the back, like refrigerator stocked full of Red Bull. And I just remember in my head thinking, oh, this guy has got it going on. Like this
Red
guy,
Bull fridge sealed it.
He is destined for success if he has a fully stocked Red Bull refrigerator in his office.
It might help to orient, like, what year do you think that was? Can you try?
Because
I remember when I got that Red Bull fridge and it was...
when were you in that office? That was, I bet it was 20 years ago. I'm 44 now.
Okay. It was certainly before, it was right around the year 2000.
Okay. So 18-ish years. That makes sense.
It could have been, no, that would have been somewhere between 98 and 2000, and the middle of 2000 was when that was.
Okay, so you're better with time than I am.
Only because I have, I know when that fridge was a piece of furniture because I didn't have a lot of other furniture. And a funny backstory about that is the person who, I was the first US photographer to contribute to the Red Bull photo files. And that happened at Tahoe. I met the Red Bull a guy named Ulrich Grill,
Oh yeah.
who started the Red Bull
Yeah, I
photo
know
files. There was no
Ulrich.
media around Red Bull. It was just a beverage that they had licensed from Thailand. And so in that fridge, what you didn't know is in addition to these new cans of Red Bull that started in the late 90s, there was also a couple bottles of the syrupy Thai,
Oh yes,
the
of
original
course.
formula. And not to date ourselves, but I remember there was a person. There was literally a white van. I knew Red Bull had called me and said that we'd like to, we're trying to seed this product. Basically, we'd like to put a fridge in your. And I was like, okay, cool. And once a week there was a white van that
Just
showed
rolled
up,
I love it.
and just some guy came in with a pallet full of Red Bull and filled the thing up and disappeared. It was
love it.
just
I
bizarre.
love it.
Okay, but we're gonna go back to that time because that was a time where you were just figuring it out. I was just figuring it out, and this was action sports before it really had any media stories being told about it. Tell us way back how you got your start.
Yeah, I mean that was a really special moment. Kind of in the mid to late '90s. I was a kid in college. I'd fallen in love with rock climbing. I fell in love with photography, kind of in the span of 7 days. First rock climbing, then photography. I realized my photos were awful, and these two parallel pursuits were born. And I honed the craft. I started working in the newspaper world, and really was learning the craft of storytelling. I went down this traditional photojournalism path, but in every free moment I was out rock climbing and having adventures. And finally I it got to this breaking point where I realized, wait a second, I'm taking pictures of stuff that this isn't why I fell in love with photography. I was, shooting pictures of the mayor and, football games and baseball games. And eventually sat down with my boss at the newspaper and I said, can you help me devise a plan? Give me some guidance. How do I actually photograph the things that I care most about, which is the outdoor adventure world, climbing in particular? And he hired me, he'd helped me devise a plan, and he hired me for another 6 months, and I saved up $3,000, and I went home and I convinced my father that I should take 6 months off from college. And my dad was an educator, but that day he drafted a contract on a napkin that stated clearly I would return to college after those 6 months on the road. And I had a Honda Civic, and I took out all the seats except the driver's seat, cut out a piece of plywood, and that's the advantage to being a shorter guy. You can sleep in your Honda Civic. And I was just a dirtbag. I drove around the United States for 6 months, photographing rock climbing. Every day I would pull into a campground and introduce myself and ask if I could hang out and shoot pictures. And I came back from that first 6 months on the road and edited my pictures down to sort of the best action climbing photographs and the best lifestyle, and shipped them off to Climbing Magazine and Patagonia, respectively. And much to my surprise, the next day the phone rang. And I was literally overnight, I was in business. Like the phone rang and they started licensing pictures. And I got the first validation that what I was doing out there, kind of applying the skill that I learned at the paper, applying it to the adventure sports world, was working. Like people actually thought it was halfway decent content. And it really that feels like yesterday. That's the crazy part.
Yeah.
Is it really feels, that's where I say I have no sense of time until I look in the mirror and I realize,
Right. Who's
wait,
the old
how
guy?
did I get, who's
the old guy in that window?
Yeah, who did I just said that to someone. I hadn't seen someone, this book tour, I've met a lot of old friends. And I remember standing in one of the venues and a guy comes up and I think, God, you look familiar. Shake hands. And in my head, I'm thinking, God, you look like shit. You look old. And then I realized, oh, wait.
That's me.
Yeah, wait. We've all aged in this process. But it does feel like yesterday. I mean, it's really, and, it's a little cliche to say, but boy, everything has fallen into place.
Yeah.
And I don't want to say it's luck. It's just a whole lot of hard work and passion. And I think I smile every day because I'm having a damn good time along the way. And when I say damn good, that's even the challenges. When I'm looking into the wind and getting hammered, I'm still smiling.
Well, let me break something to you. It wasn't yesterday.
I know.
And this career arc, now that you can say this looking backwards, of yours has just been amazing. And as a longtime friend and peer, I want to acknowledge that you've been doing this for so long such an established player in the field and have been able to find success not just in taking pictures, but in making a lot of videos and films. It's been super fun to watch. Also, in collaborating around Creative Live, your recent book, it's like it's just really fun to watch someone who you know, and this, I'm speaking from my perspective, who is a true master at something. So I want to put a dot in this thing, mastery. And you told what I would say is a pretty quick story. You pulled the seats out of your car, and then 6 months later you were earning money. I want to go back and explore this part, because there's a lot of people who are listening and watching right now for whom the idea of transitioning into something new is scary as hell, is loaded with risk. They may not be 22 or whatever you were when you did that. Maybe they're 42. So there may be more at risk than just some college tuition. But regardless if you're 42 or 22, there is some failure. So take us back, failures, fear, it's a loaded equation. So take us back, and I want to explore your mental state around getting your job as the photographer at the paper, saving up some money, and then actually taking the step to go out on your own, which ostensibly was 6 months, but turned into the rest of your life and very easily could have not worked out. So add some color around your emotion and what was going through your mind at that time. If it really was yesterday, there should be no problem remembering.
And Chase, I have to be honest, I rarely say this. I'm still a little concerned someone's going to figure out that I haven't worked a day in my life. There's still that little fear that someone's going to figure out, wait a second, this guy, how is this guy actually making money?
Yeah.
Doing what he loves almost every day. I think I've always been my toughest critic. I think that's really important. I mean, you and I were talking about this on the couch an hour ago. It's sort of, good enough is never good enough. I mean, I think that's a quality that, those people that I admire, those who are successful in whatever it is they do, whether it's composing music or science or photography or filmmaking, they are really critical of their own work. And I think that's something I learned as a kid, as a gymnast. I think it was just ingrained. It was just beaten to me in the gym, through just endless workouts and working hard and understanding what it meant to hurt, but work through it. And I think in the world of photography or in the storytelling world, you have to be very realistic about at what level are you performing, and and we have, every time you depress that shutter as a photographer, you then get to look at an image, and you can literally look at it and say, is this mediocre? Is this good? Is this great? And it turns out great's really hard. That was one of the experiences in making this book that, for 30 some odd years I've been a photographer, and I've got a few great pictures. And it's hard to even say a few. It takes a lot to make great pictures, a lot.
Yeah.
In a career, you make a few great pictures. Good is, you can consistently make good. That means you're a professional.
Yeah.
Consistently making good as a professional. Mediocre photography, that's real easy. I think many folks can get to that level, but we're striving, and I learned this really early on, the way that you make this into a career is you are ultra critical of what you're doing, and you're constantly and every day and in every action, you're striving for great. And great's not easy. Yeah. I mean, that's it. And it's, I think, I like to say that there's something called the collective subjective, right? Photography subjective, art subjective, music subjective. But if you ask 100 people, is this a great song? And everybody says, it's a great song. It's a great song. That's all, because it's subjective. It's the collective opinion. Mm-hmm. But you still need to be the first judge of, is that work good? Have you pushed yourself hard enough? How would you refine it? Even those great pictures, even the greatest pictures of my career, I can still look at them and say, oh, it would have been so much better if. And I think that's a healthy attitude to have, a healthy mental perspective, which is, how do you constantly push yourself to that next level? Yeah. And how are you always critical? And I think that started early in my career. I mean, I think in that first 6 months on the road, I had magazines that I could look at, and the guys that I looked up to, the men and women, the Greg Eppersons, the Beth Walds, and I could look at their pictures, and then I could look at my slide film, or at least I remembered what I saw through the lens, and I thought, is it as good, not as good, or better than what I'm seeing in print? And I think that's a basic business philosophy, right? Whether you're making widgets or you're making photographs, is your widget just as good as all the competition, or is your widget so much better that it's going to compel someone to walk out and stop using their old widget and buy a new widget? And I don't know, I've always just lived by that philosophy.
So true, though. It's so true.
It's true, and every now and again, you fall below that. I'm always striving to it better be good, trying to get to great. Every now and again you fumble and it goes to like mediocre. And as long as you're honest with yourself that like what happened, and you do this analysis of why did that happen? How do I make sure that doesn't happen again? I think that's the sustainability part.
Yeah.
Right. It's sort of there's just this consciousness of I'm always, you've got a North Star. It's what am I aiming? What am I trying to do? And I also really early on realized, and I'd be curious if you feel the same way. I think storytelling, photography, filmmaking became a priority in my life, and I was willing to skip other things in life. Right? You can't do it all. You can't. As a college student, this is an easy way to explain it. I fell in love with photography really early. I was a kid. I was 13 years old, and by the time I got to college, all I wanted to do was be outside taking pictures. And well, what did that mean? What's the compromise? I didn't go to football games, and I just wasn't interested. I wanted to be hanging on a rope in Yosemite, waiting for opportunities. That's all I could. I had blinders on.
Yeah.
I mean, to some degree, I think I still have blinders on. There's a lot of life that I just, block that out, because it's not that it's not great for other people. It's just it's not for me.
Bad or boring or any of those things. But yeah.
Yeah.
I liken it to. Well, first of all, I agree with your statement, as you sort of prefaced it. Second of all, I liken it to sacrifice. Now, I was just talking to a mutual friend of ours, Chris Burkhart, about like the sacrifices. And when I think back, I can say that for different periods in my career, have not been a good husband, or not been a good friend, or not been a good business partner, or not been a good fill in the blank, because I've been so obsessed, like freakishly obsessed with the work, that not enough room for everything.
Right.
And I made some very hard choices, and I think that whether you're thinking about it in terms of mediocre, good, or great, and the buckets that you were using, I found that I couldn't tap into the occasional greatness and be consistently good. And by consistent, I'm talking about like a professional athlete, quality consistent, or a professional photographer in this case, that it wasn't possible to do it the other way around. And for the people who have told me that it's possible, I've yet to meet a person who's actually done it, who's the person who's telling me that it's possible to have balance or whatever in order to truly hit that level of greatness. And that it's what I'm trying to just to be really crystal clear, like I'm not advocating that everyone who picks up a camera should try and be a world class or world renowned or a professional even photographer. I think on the contrary, there's a lot of room to be a really good photographer and love it and have none of the downside, and be able to be a good father and husband and friend and business partner and mentor and blah, blah, blah. But all that being said, long question, what have you sacrificed in order to make those handful of great pictures and to have the career that you've had? What have you sacrificed?
A few things. I just had some really close friends over for dinner the other night, and one of my dear friends, I've missed a lot of weddings. That's a great example. Some of my best friends, I've missed their weddings. And it's, that at one level you can write that off as like, that happens. But not when you have a normal, when you work for a Fortune 500 company and you have vacation time and you can schedule your time off, maybe short of being the CEO, you make weddings. Like, that's it. Like when your friend gets married, you make the wedding. But I was in Pakistan. It's one of those. And And
doing the trip of a lifetime
that's right.
that led to the development and possibility of your career.
Absolutely, that's right. And I think, but my friends, I mean, the people that I'm really close to also know that. Like they understand. We talk about it. They know that. They've known that from the beginning. I'm 44 now, and my wife is 10 years younger, kind of by design. And we had a child much later. Well, I have a 6-year-old girl now. There's no way that I was ready to have that child at 30 or in my early 30s. It was impossible. But those are, I think there's just a lot of time with friends, a lot of time with our community. It's the missing weddings. It's those are real sacrifices. But I don't look back and regret any of that. I mean, I think I am who I am. I think I'm trying to be an incredible dad. I'm showing what I want to show my daughter is passion. What does passion look like? And some of that is, with her by my side as we do things together. And some of that is from a distance as I'm sitting in a wild place, FaceTiming, explaining why I'm doing it. But that I think that comes with whatever you care deeply about. You get X amount of time on this planet. You get X amount of time per day, and it's how do you partition it? How do you dole that out? And I'm very particular about my time. I don't want to say selfish about my time because I'm very giving with my time. I want to share. I'm always trying to help folks, not just family and friends, but the community as a whole. But I'm very deliberate about where my time goes because it's, the older you get, the more you realize it's pretty finite.
Yeah.
It's a pretty finite amount of time, and how much of it goes to the craft, how much of it goes to, I always say that if I weren't a photographer, filmmaker, if I weren't running a business, I would be a teacher. And the beauty of our career is that in the filmmaking world, in the photography world, I think it's one of our responsibilities is to pay it forward, to share, to kind of, there's no secret sauce in this game.
Yeah.
I learned a long time ago. The secret sauce is you just work damn hard all the time.
You better love what you do because you're about to grind your nose off.
Yeah, that's right. I don't know if that's the answer that you're looking for.
No,
but
I mean, just the concept of weddings and weddings, us, being able to justify missing your best friend's wedding when you're 20 is, 25 or whatever, and you start to be able to look back a little bit with a little bit more time under your belt. You're like, wow, that was, kind of a big deal. And I think of the holidays, the family experiences, the weddings, the births, the deaths, the funerals, the
holidays are a good one. That didn't even occur to me.
Yeah, hundreds and hundreds. And I'm not exaggerating. I missed hundreds of those events.
Yeah.
And holidays and time with family. And as you said, not regretting it, but the awareness I think is part of what I'm asking for. And I say that not to dissuade anyone who's thinking of going for it, more to understand that the people who are, if you aspire to be a Corey Rich, this concept of being around for everything is not, I would say it's not possible. But that's where I would immediately fall back and say, but the goal isn't to try and be another Corey Rich. The goal is to be the best you. And if you understand where your values are, and if you can create a life that's aligned with those values, then you're going to be just fine, whether you want to be world class or a hobbyist. But to tap into what you've done to be able to make a book like this, the films like you've made, is next level.
Well, thanks. I think what's interesting about this idea of sacrifice is along the way, very rarely did I consciously feel like, I'm giving up something that I am sacrificing.
Not really a choice, right?
There was just never a choice. Yeah. There was never a choice. It was a no. When you said holidays, I'd realized. I'd blocked it out.
Yeah.
It was I just for 20 years missed all the holidays. 100%. We just for the first, now with a little girl, and I've designed my life. I'm designing it slightly different because I want to be there. I want to be a dad, and she travels with me, and my wife and I are really conscientious of our life. But we just, probably for the first time in 15 or 20 years, went to the big family Thanksgiving gathering in Washington, D.C. And, my cousins and aunts and uncles. And, it still felt like I remember it as a kid, but I've just been MIA.
25
And everyone was
years.
shocked. Wait, you're here, And it was, and it's exactly what you said. It's, I don't remember ever making the decision to not be there. It's just I was never there because I was, I was doing this. Really.
It felt like it wasn't. I think that's an interesting acknowledgement. I can say the same thing. I felt like I never felt like I felt sad. Like, oh, I'm gonna miss your wedding. But it was never like, should I not do the Nike job?
Right.
And I don't want to paint it as a dichotomy. I'm trying to help, folks who are listening understand if they want to operate at that level. And I think the same is we're talking about photography, and in your case, Corey, action sports photography. But I have yet to find in entrepreneurship or the cello or the nonprofit world or like fill in the blank, anyone who is truly operating that level that hasn't made insane sacrifices.
I also think when you talk about that, the person that wants to pursue photography, I started when I was a kid, but there's someone listening that's 42 years old and they want to go down this road. And I think the other part that I think is flawed, oftentimes, I get a lot of email and people asking questions. And when someone in essence sends me their business plan before they send me their photos, it's, I'm a firm believer, and it goes back to the quality. If you have the great content, the business side falls into place. It's, I think, going at it back like the other way, which is, so here's my strategy over the next 24 months. And then I'm going to learn how to make photos, but here's how I'm going to sell them and how I'm going to get assignments. And why are art buyers not calling me back? I always came at it from the other side, which is, I'm like a guy about the journey, right? To travel hopefully is better than to arrive. I love the journey. I love being in the experience, on the trip, making the pictures, trying to make the picture better, working hard. It's fun when I see it on the magazine cover or the billboard or, on television, but I don't get as much joy out of that kind of the final, the final delivery, the publication, the airing. That's not the great joy. The great joy for me comes out of the process. And I think when people come at it more from the, how do I get jobs and how do I make money at this? I always like, time out, wait, that's, at least for me, that's never been, that all falls into place if what you're doing, and it goes back to that like mediocre, good, great. If what you're doing is great, everything else falls into line. I mean, really, it falls. I mean, assuming
the
you're not
opportunity for it to fall in line is there. But if you don't have the work, there's no opportunity.
Zero. That's right. That's it. Well, that's not true. I mean, I think I've met a few people where you scratch your head and you think, "Damn, you are just an amazing entrepreneur."
Yeah.
Your work is awful. It's pretty rare, though.
Yeah.
That's the exception to the rule. Yeah. Usually, it's someone has exceptional work because they've worked really hard. Usually they have some raw talent. And you can cultivate talent. I don't think that's just something that you're born with. Their willingness to work really, really hard, and they're a good person.
Yeah.
Those
things
three
combine
things.
to make anything, right?
Yeah.
Anything. Yeah. I don't know if there are some questions for those folks at home who are listening. We did have Instagram Live. All right, I'm going to repeat that question for the folks at home since I've got a mic and you don't. When you first started shooting, did you start off by getting releases from the climbers you were photographing when you talked about being at the campground? I mean, to me, that's almost this like, to preface the answer, it's almost like your business plan before the work question that you just sort of answered. Like you're already planning the viability of your images without it be, I don't know if it's freaking good or not, but
And this is probably a question coming from someone that's making great pictures and now they're trying to figure out the business side. Climbing is an amazing, like any action sport, any adventure sport. You don't show up at the tennis courts, down the street in Seattle and Andre Agassi's out there whacking balls. I mean, it just doesn't happen. Mm-hmm. The pros play on one field and the amateurs play on another. And the beauty of adventure sports, they ski on the same hills, they go to the same cliffs. And 20 years ago, I figured out that I would go to Yosemite and 50 yards to the left were the best climbers in the world. What they were climbing was steeper and with fewer holds. And I've always been a believer in you're just completely transparent about what you're trying to do, what I'm trying to do. Which first and foremost, I'm just driven by, I introduce myself and then, do you mind? I love taking pictures. You love rock climbing. Do you mind if I spend time with you taking pictures? And 99.9% of the time, the answer is, absolutely, it's this perfect marriage between what I love to do and what they love to do. This is a long-winded way of saying, no, I don't worry about the model release until I've actually done something. It's really,
especially
the model,
early on. If you're a
course.
pro and your goal is to take pictures at the first of all, most working pros that I don't know, their goal is not to like make money working at the local crag. Right. You're sort of like, that's where you're honing your skills, and then money is made on adventures when when a bunch of conditions line up. It's a route a little more intentional. That being said,
yeah, I think as a young person shooting pictures, it starts with make amazing pictures of that climber first, that you're going to wow them, whether that's the climber, the mountain biker, the skier, and then ask for this model release. It's really what you alluded to, Chase. It's don't let the business side of it get in front of. Don't let it, don't get the cart before the horse.
Tail wag the dog.
Yeah,
There's a million of those. Yeah. And I do also like a piece of color, if I may, is that I found that 99% of the images that I was proud of, or that I felt like had viability in the market, or were just powerful storytelling images, they were intentionally made, and they weren't made where I was documenting something. It was a collaboration where I know at this moment you're going to hit this mark on the turn, or this hold, or this, element. And sure, there's some documentarian approach that works, and occasionally, but 99 times out of 100, it's a collaboration.
Right.
So I'm going to be here. I'm focused on this moment, or this hold, or this move, or this fill in the blank. And where our skills come together is that I'm going to be there. I'm going to nail my part. And as the athlete or climber or whatever, so it's more collaborative for the people who are at home going like, how are pro photos made?
Yeah, I almost feel like there's different phases in my career. And maybe it's because it's so deeply rooted in climbing. Definitely early on for me, it was truly, because I didn't know any different. I just knew what it meant to be a documentary photographer, a photojournalist in the adventure world. And so, for a big chunk of my early career, I was really just along for the ride.
Yeah.
And kind of waiting for these fleeting moments to unfold in front of me. And, of course, the athletes totally knew that I was there, and, they were, but I'm, I think for 5 or 10 years, it was truly kind of mostly found moments on expeditions. And then this kind of interesting thing happens, which is, then it was in the print world, and my bio, my photo credit was appearing everywhere. And then the phone starts ringing, and it's the ad agency world calling, and they're saying, we love this picture. Now can you make it happen on demand? And I think that's what you're describing.
Yeah.
The way that I graduated into can you do it in a commercial capacity or for an ad? It was, first I did it sort of in that documentary, authentic way. And then once I knew how to do it authentically, then I knew how to kind of orchestrate it to happen on demand on a certain day with a bunch of people standing behind me telling me what they want or what they don't like. And so, for me, everyone gets to that point in a different way. For me, it was coming really from that photojournalism background. The two things I understood, which was being outside and being dirty and, suffering and photojournalism. And now I think those two skills, oftentimes if I'm hired, it's not for a super polished image. It's something that still has a little bit of a gritty, raw feel to it.
Yeah.
But, 9 times out of 10 now, I'm being asked to do it like on a Thursday at noon.
And that's the difference between a pro and an amateur, right?
Right.
Like the pro golfer, you're like, oh, I can only hit it straight if it's not windy and it's not rainy and no one is watching, and that doesn't equal a pro. A pro is like you can literally create that stuff on demand.
Yeah.
All right, I want to go back just a second to that time we met at that was my first photo studio that was out of my house. Do you remember the conversations that we had at all?
Gosh, I don't.
I'm wondering how they how they compare to the ones we're having right now.
Yeah. I think it was more of like a passing. I think it was. I don't remember a long conversation.
Just for what it's worth, I walked by that this morning because I still live 2 blocks, different house, but I live 2 blocks from that location, and it's right next door to my coffee shop where I go every morning if I'm in Seattle.
That's really funny.
So I know the spot super well. I can picture it in my mind. It's now a restaurant that my wife and I are partners in with another friend. But that space is still there, and that's why I was curious if you remember what we talked about relative to say what we're talking about now.
I mean, I think what's so fascinating now to look back, kind of look in the rearview mirror in my, it's still short careers. We're young guys. It's that there's an amazing camaraderie amongst professionals in this industry. Whether it's you and I sitting down or whether you just talked about Chris, I think there's just this open door. I think, and we're living in the golden age of just free-flowing, sharing information. And I think Creative Live is right at the pinnacle of that. It's that idea of just sharing and paying it forward. And I love that no matter, the colleagues that I have, the friends that I have in this industry, that we can pick up the telephone and just have deep, sincere, real conversations about the trials, the tribulations. We can celebrate together over the phone or in person.
Yep.
And that, I think we're lucky that we were born into this industry kind of at the tail end of where folks were a lot more tight-lipped early on. I think there really was this sort of philosophy when I was maybe younger that, there's just secrets and you don't share those secrets. And now it's, come on, there's no secrets. It's all about how do we collectively raise the bar.
Yep.
And, I get so excited when I see a new name and I see incredible work that they're doing. And it energizes me. I love seeing new talented folks out there, men and women just doing cool stuff. And I want to believe that it's because everyone shares these days. I mean, that's part of why the bar is being raised.
Well, speaking of sharing, I want to visit your book here because thank you, A, for sharing it with me and sending me an advance copy, signed, no less, right there. But speaking of sharing and stories, your new book here, Stories Behind the Images, Lessons from a Life in Adventure Photography. This is 30 years in the making, right?
Yeah, it sure is.
It's like a whole lifetime worth of spending time outdoors. And what compelled you to create it? What's the why behind this book?
I think from the very first time that I went rock climbing, I won a pull-up contest. I did 35 pull-ups when I was 13 years old, and one of my junior high school teachers took notice of the short, strong kid and invited me to go rock climbing. And my father agreed to let me go, but he sent my older brother. And one morning at 5 a.m., he dropped us off in the parking lot. And we loaded into Bob Porter's truck, and my math teacher was in the passenger seat. And I remember distinctly he had a 40-pack of powdered donuts that he opened up, and this aroma of powdered donuts blew through the car. And he had a 7-Eleven coffee, which also had a distinct smell. And as we zipped out of the parking lot, he cracked open a Budweiser. And there was this mix of Budweiser, 7-Eleven coffee, and powdered donuts. And I immediately thought, God, this is just so different than going on a road trip with mom and dad. Right? This was like it already had blown my mind. And then we drove for 2 hours into the Sierra Nevada mountains. And Bob and George immediately went into storytelling mode. They just had awesome story after awesome story of adventure and comedy and trials and tribulations. And then we went climbing, and I fell in love with every aspect of the physical and the mental and the cultural aspects, just the culture of climbing. And I think on that day, I fell in love with the art of storytelling. I realized I was sitting with two Jedi masters of storytelling, and they didn't know it. They were two school teachers who loved climbing, but they had this gift. We got back in the car, and they told more stories. And I think that day, I didn't realize it, but I wanted stories of my own. I wanted to learn. I intuitively began to learn that craft of storytelling. And I can honestly say that today, one of my favorite things to do is sit around a campfire and listen to stories and tell stories. And that's really what this book is. It's, I wrote the book in a way, I envisioned sitting at a campfire with the reader, with you, and I'm sharing these tales that hopefully are entertaining. Hopefully there's something educational. Oftentimes they're caricatures of amazing people. I mean, that's the greatest gift that I've had in my career, is to spend time around people who totally inspire me and wow me with the way they think and the way they are, that they've mastered what they do. Mm-hmm. And oftentimes they're self-deprecating. They're the lessons. I kind of put my ego in check when I wrote this book, because I think the mistakes I've made are some of the, the great lessons in the book. But that's it. It's really about, I wanted to preserve the stories, first of all. I found these are a lot of the stories that I tell. There are 56 of the stories that I tell, sitting around a campfire. And the hardest part about this book was, which 50 some odd stories of the, now the greater part of my life of stories, what do you tell and which ones are meaningful?
Yeah.
This is definitely not a traditional photo book.
I think that's one of the things that I want to be really clear on, and from the outsider perspective, is this is a book about photography, but to me it's a story, it's a book about being a creator and creating these moments and creating these stories.
Yeah.
And with intention, and then capturing, and then being able to craft them. And it's about life. This is like the Trojan horse of this book is not the photography aspect, it's the other way around. It's the life lessons and the humanity and the connection. That's why it's so universal, it feels like, but it's living life through your lens.
I was pretty adamant that, this is a book that you read and then you look at the pictures because the stories are about the pictures. But I was pretty adamant that it shouldn't be a hardcover, oversized book. And I'm a connoisseur of photo books. We have shelves of photo books, but I can honestly say I'm not sure I've ever read a hardcover photo book cover to cover.
Yeah.
It's just not designed for that. It's
Yeah.
designed to sit on your, coffee table. And,
Yep.
and this book, I wanted it to be small, and I wanted it to be something that, if someone's going backpacking, they could tear it in half and bring a few chapters into the woods. I keep on waiting to show up at someone's house and see it on the back of the toilet, because that's, it's designed to actually be consumed.
Yeah.
And it also, you don't need to read it in order. I mean, these chapters, really, you could pick it up anywhere, jump to the middle of the book, and it doesn't have to be chronological the way that you don't read it start to finish. But that was really the spirit of the book. I wanted it to be lessons that folks could, that last forever. And I also was very conscientious of, these stories. I wanted to preserve them while they still are meaningful to me. I don't want this to come off the wrong way, but if tomorrow I got hit by a bus, I wanted my daughter to have a really good sense of who her dad was. And I'm not planning to get hit by a bus or fall off a rope or get, buried in an avalanche. But there has been this reality in my world of, I used to say, that when people would ask, is what you do dangerous? And my go-to answer, Chase, was, driving to work in Seattle, commuting in traffic is far more dangerous than what I do. But now, 30 years later, I don't know anyone that's died commuting to work. I don't know anyone that's died commuting to work, but I can't count all of the friends that I've lost on my fingers and toes.
Yeah.
And so there's that, that was the other small motivation behind this was, preserve these stories that, and I, one day, my daughter's barely interested in the book right now, but she loves storytelling because I think it's so much a part of our home. When friends come over, we sit around our fire, which is really the island in our kitchen, and we tell stories. And Layla's totally embraced this idea of communicating, and she's even learning at 6 years old how to tee up a story where you describe some detail, and then you set it up so that there's some mystery around what's going to happen, and then you get to the punchline, and I realized that's what this is about. I want her to have that gift.
Well, we talked earlier about sacrifice, and you've already said that some of the stories made it in the book and some didn't. Did you have a criteria on which to decide?
Yeah,
or was it pure intuition? This is a go and this is a no-go.
Yeah. Well, maybe it's worth describing the process for making this book. It was, I think I'm a solid photographer. I mean, I've made we talked about that. I've made a few great pictures in my life, a lot of good pictures. I think I'm a pretty good storyteller. I think I love storytelling as much as I do photography, but I'm not a great writer. Writing is painful for me. I can do it, but it really hurts. And we talked about this, and you're in writing your book.
Yeah.
And so I really, in putting this book together, the way that it would start is I find I'm the most creative when I'm actually moving. You know, I can sit at a desk and I can force myself to do something, but I enter the flow state when my heart's beating at 150 beats per second, some sweat's dripping in my eye, and you know, there's sort of endorphins. And most of this book was written while walking or riding a bike, and I would ride up a hill for an hour or two. And you know, the first ride was just thinking. I had a couple of pictures in my head, and I would think through, what is the story? What would the message be? What would I actually write in this chapter? And I think many photographers have this gift. We can see things, we can visually. I can tee up lots of visuals in my head and remember those little details. And I'd go through a checklist oftentimes of that photo doesn't really work because the story's not strong enough. And I'd be writing each one of them in my head. And then I would finally, after a few bike rides or hikes, I would hone in on, you know, yep, this is an image. This is a worthy image. And the iPhone has changed our world. I'm taking notes just in the Notes app. And then I would maybe spend another ride thinking about what would the lesson be? How would I tell this story? And then eventually I would, whether it was riding up a hill or sitting on a plane or sitting in a hotel bar, I would just do a voice memo into the phone. As though I'm sitting at a fire, I would tell my 5 or 10 or 15 or 20 minute story into my phone. And then that would get transcribed. And then I worked with an incredible writer, Andrew Bisharat, and we as a team would take that 20-minute transcription and cut it down, and Andrew would add some of his wordsmithing. And oftentimes we'd go through a few revisions. But it started as doing blog posts. I mean, over 5 years ago. It was probably inspired by your blog. I mean, you were like the guy that like showed us all how to create a photography blog. And I started writing essays, and 70 some odd essays later realized, dang, I think we've got a book here.
I found so much joy in all of the little moments. I remember seeing pictures in your book the first time I saw them, say, in a Patagonia catalog. Mm-hmm. Or there's a guy named Justin Bastian.
Right.
And I ended up meeting Justin through doing my iPhone book. He randomly wrote me. I'm a developer in Silicon Valley, and then I'm like, only years later, piecing all this stuff together. Like, wait a minute, Justin, who introduced me to Katerina Fake, who started Flickr, who is in this photograph of Corey's that was in the Patagonia catalog that I saw in 2004 or whatever. Like, it was very nostalgic for me. And perhaps I think on the obvious superficial answer might be able to say because we were in the same industry and pursuing a similar path. But go back to that point that I mentioned earlier about like there's just a universality to this material about adventure. Like whether you're climbing El Cap or you're trying to figure out what school to get your kid into, or you've decided to change careers, like there is adventure in all of those things. And that's part of what I've, can say indisputably that I love about the book is there's this fabric, and I think it's you as a storyteller. So do you feel like that method that you used, this combination of visualization and transcription, and would you have changed anything in making the book?
No, I don't think I know.
You said it was joyful earlier, which to me was amazing. Like writing my book was not joyful. It was joyful. There were moments of joy, but a lot of pain.
This might be, I hadn't thought about this until you just asked the question. This might be the only thing in my life that I actually did like slowly and methodically over time in like bite-sized pieces. Like I was never the guy.
Congratulations.
But it was, of course,
achieving.
I mean, the funny thing is I think it was by mistake.
Yeah.
I wish I could say that was intentionally, because I've always been the guy that waited until the 11th hour to cram for an exam. I mean, in fact, once I did a TEDx talk, and I don't know why in my head, I just convinced myself everybody must wait until like a few days before, and then they put a talk together. And I remember, and this is just to kind of illustrate how I'm always the guy that does it at the last minute, except for this book. And I remember sitting in my basement, my office was still in my house, And one morning I got up and the TEDx talk is a couple of days out, and I called one of my dear friends, Tommy Caldwell, a rock climber, and Tommy had just done a big TEDx talk in DC. And I think I planned to call Tommy just to get validation that, yeah, I'm doing it just like everyone else. You wait until the 11th hour and then you just cram. Yeah, you just go deep. Yeah, you just dig deep and you just make it happen. And I had, it's 6 a.m. and I called Tommy. I say, hey, so how did you prepare for that TEDx talk? I mean, what did you do? Tell me. And he said, when's your talk? And I said, oh, it's on, Saturday. He said, this Saturday? I said, yeah, this Saturday. And he said, oh, dude. He said, oh, man, I've never prepared for anything in my life more than that TEDx talk. He said, I hired a coach. And then it went through this process of rounds of writing. Then he would go for hikes in the woods with
this
like
is a
cards.
Guy who climbed never before climbed routes on the Dawn Wall.
Oh, yeah. And of course, in that moment, sort of my heart stopped and I realized, okay, I have to drop everything that I'm doing right now. Like I stopped picking up the phone. I had to put a talk together. And for the next 72 hours, I just worked on putting that talk together. But that's my standard MO.
Yeah.
That's even though I don't like to admit it.
Yeah.
This was like the exception to the rule. I trickled these stories out and enjoyed. There was almost a lesson in this that now I'm realizing I should do more things like that in life. I should do more things that are actually just like every day and slowly that kind of, accumulate over time. That's my takeaway from this talk.
Awesome.
I need to do more of the slow trickle accumulation over time and getting maximum joy out of the experiences.
Well, congratulations on the book. It's really stunning, and I had a couple of questions, if we can, on a couple of different stories. So, why did you start with? And I don't know what the actual title is. Not the preface. The doing what you love is chapter 1, and. I think a lot of people listening and watching understand superficially the value of doing what you love, because as you mentioned earlier, at one point during our conversations, it was like kind of cliche to say this or think this, or clearly if you're going to start a book that you've been working 30 years to tell, and the title of the first chapter is Doing What You Love, there's something more there than superficial.
Yeah. I mean, to me, it's still just the pillar of my career. If there's one thing, or it's not just the pillar of my career. I think it's who I am. It all comes down to passion. Right? It all comes down to you can't put as much time and energy into something as we do into photography or filmmaking or whatever it is you're doing, unless you really, really deeply love it and are passionate about it. And I think that first chapter is about taking 6 months off from college. And I probably tell the story of, convincing my parents to take a semester off.
The seats out of your car.
Yeah,
that's
the seats.
Classic. I remember that the first time you told me before the book and before the conversation. I think even before your Creative Live class, you told me that story, and I thought it was really moving.
But that's born out of passion.
Yeah.
Right. I mean, that's born out of doing what you love. And that picture of Kevin Gallagher ascending a rope over the northern Mexico desert, that was the byproduct of going out and doing what you love for 6 months with zero plan for, was this going to turn into a career? Could I ever pay for the 100 rolls of film that I shot? It was just born sheerly out of, I talk about I still have blinders that are like this. I think then I had blinders that were like this. All I could see was this just narrow field of view. But that field of view was being outside, having adventures, being around people that were amazing, and trying to make really compelling pictures. And those are sort of the tenets of my life and career that they kind of haven't changed, actually.
I was just going to say, have they changed?
I mean, it's still, I spend less time hanging on ropes today.
Yeah.
And I think as I've grown up, I've also had this realization. I talked about having a daughter, and I realized, I don't want to always be taking risks. I really love being alive, and I want to have a sustainable career and lifestyle. I wanted to buy a house, and I realized that there was a part of my brain that I like running a business. I like the kind of those challenge. I just like challenge, I guess, is the. So my world looks a little different now. I'm a business partner in a production company, and we have 15 full-time employees, and we work with contractors all over the globe, and not everything that we shoot is adventure sports. Mm-hmm. But I always say that, everything that I learned shooting adventure sports, like, look, if you can do it hanging off a rope 2,000 feet off the ground, I can definitely do it with my feet on concrete. With lots of people talking into my ears.
And a coffee cup and a name on your chair.
Absolutely. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, absolutely. In fact, then I get, in the adventure world, you spend so much time and energy just physically getting there, and you're managing risk, and you're, the psychology of the athletes, and then you switch gears into, okay, I'm finally in this spot. Now I'm going to look through this rectangle and be creative. And it's like you're shifting constantly from, creative to safety to kind of, athleticism to get yourself there. But those are the greatest lessons. Like learning it, I'm so thankful that I learned the craft in the adventure world, and now in the kind of commercial advertising world, you're still shifting gears, but it's a different style of shifting gears. It's not, is this Serac going to, crush me, or is the rope getting frayed on an edge? It's, okay, that client over there really wants me to try something else, but I need to get this shot. Let's get him another latte.
Yeah.
While I, humor him, and then I'm going to tell some stories, and then I'm going to, and so it's all just challenge, and I guess that's what I love. I love the process of making a great final product. That's I think where I get all the joy.
I'm going to let you choose. I have two stories that I want to touch on. One is, I'll just go there first because I'm choosing to. And you talk a little bit about shooting Alex on free soloing.
Right.
And I mentioned this in part because it's relatable because of the success of free solo. Our mutual friends have made the film. Jimmy Chin, one of the co-directors with his wife, Shai, you were photographing those same places and moments with the same people, and because it's relatable to anyone, you don't have to be an action sports photographer or lover, because the film has seen such widespread success. But earlier you talked about losing friends and you can't count them on fingers and toes. What's it like in that moment? You do a nice job of talking about it in the book, but share it with us here.
Alex.
What is the guy doing without ropes? So your mind takes a second to recognize, and you're just like, something is wrong here, very, very wrong.
Alex is I think I can say this about many of the people in this book, that everyone in this book actually, they're all extraordinary human beings, in their own right. And I think that's one of the gifts of being a photographer, is that that camera is the golden ticket. It lets us into their lives. Mm-hmm. We get a backstage pass to life, which is pretty extraordinary. Literally we can open any door. We photographers, storytellers, with that camera. And Alex is one of those, he is the 1 in 10 billion. He is really, Alex is one of the smartest guys that you will ever meet. He's really intelligent. He's also an incredible athlete.
Yeah, physically so gifted.
Yeah, he's a specimen. He's a specimen, but he's a specimen in kind of two different realms. He has a brain. He has the mental aptitude and capacity to process the world in a way that literally nobody else can. Mm-hmm. The way that he has mental control that no one else has. But he also, we view Alex, most folks as they should. They know Alex is like the boldest climber of all time, climbing El Capitan without a rope. But it's when you see, that those gifts together, the mental capacity with the physical capacity, is really remarkable. Alex this past summer, he came to town, and a couple of us went for a mountain bike ride. And Alex is not a mountain bike rider. I ride a lot. I'm not a great mountain bike rider, but I love riding for the exercise and what it does to my brain and kind of getting into that flow state. I'm the most creative. And Alex, he was riding like a heavy mountain bike, And it's my dear friend Chris McNamara and Alex, and then my buddy Chad, and the four of us are out there. And Alex, you know, by climbing standards, Alex is a 5'9" mountain biker. You know, that's kind of a, you know, he's a, you know, kind of, I don't even want to say intermediate mountain biker. He's like a beginner mountain biker. And we take him on probably like a bigger ride than we should, but he's an animal. Like, we know that aerobically he can handle this. And it was fascinating to watch Alex. Chad was the slowest in the group, and I was kind of between Chad and Alex, and Chris was leading the way. And so for an hour plus, I could watch Alex sort of, you know, figure out how to ride this kind of technical Tahoe granite terrain. And 30 minutes, you know, he's walking his bike and kind of falling over and getting back on. And then finally he blurts out to me, he says, I kind of get it now. It's kind of like on-sighting a boulder problem. You have to like look at the holds, but now I'm looking at like the terrain, and then I just have to like on-sight it. I'm calculating. And then he did it. Like, he just, for the rest of the ride, he went from like 5'9" to 5'12" in the span of like 30 minutes, because he had that mental capacity to sort of analyze the situation, to physically like take control of the bike, and he could send they were connected.
The
right?
messages of his brain with his body.
And he could execute, because he's one of the most highly tuned athletes on the planet. But it doesn't change, you know, to your original question, watching Alex without a rope. It's hard because you're watching a friend. I mean, you sort of, even though Alex will tell you, and I've interviewed Alex on this topic, it's, you know, about free soloing and, like, you know, being close to the edge and death. And he will, at the end of the interview, you will feel like, well, this guy, I mean, he'll never fall because he is so confident and he's so calculated. But you know, there's always the possibility, and it is. I've always, I haven't worked with Alex as much as Jimmy and Chai did for their film, but those times that I've shot Alex without a rope, I always have that conversation up front, because I just feel like I have to, which is never ever do something because I'm asking you to. And Alex has always had that confidence and sort of that sensibility to back down when he doesn't feel it. And I think you saw that in Jimmy and Chai's film.
Yeah.
That, you know, he backed down several times. And
from different aspects.
Absolutely, yeah. I mean, we did a shoot that's in the book years ago. It was for a Nikon camera launch, and Alex was one of the characters. And it was really impressive. We shot him free soloing a route in Joshua Tree. We probably shot it 3 times on day 1, and on day 2 it was a little hot. He did it 1 time, started up the second time, and was kind of like, you know, sweaty, and that's it. He backed down and he said, I think I'm done. And it was a huge relief at some level.
Yeah.
I mean, it was sort of, okay, God, we're done. We're fine. It's over.
Yeah. Because it's painful to be you and I in those moments, for sure.
Yeah, but it's also, if anyone really has processed, you know, the kind of the upside and the downside and sort of what it's Alex. I mean, you know, maybe no other free soloist in history has really kind of processed what they're doing at the level and internalized it and rationalized it and given it the level of intellect that Alex has. Now and it doesn't mean if, you know, when someone falls, it's still the same consequence.
Yeah.
But yeah, it is pretty tough. And, you know, I can say this as one of Alex's friends, and I think many friends would say, you know, we all hope that was like the grand achievement in free soloing. I think it's one of the greatest sports feats of all time.
Yeah, for
And,
sure.
you know, I don't know, maybe that's the last of the big free solos. It would be great if it were. Yeah.
I'm kind of thinking for everybody's sanity.
Forever, yeah.
Tell me one story. This is what I was trying to decide where to go. I was curious about how you answered that last one, but now, since this is about stories, a story you didn't tell that's in the book that you can share with us.
That's a really good one.
Because there's certainly a lot of them on the cutting room floor or on the bike ride somewhere that you decided to chuck.
Sure.
And if it was it because you had an image without the story, or was there a story without an image?
I think there's even, you know, in any one of these chapters, you know, I don't know how many words each chapter is, but let's call it 1,000 words. Still a lot hits the cutting room floor, right?
Yeah.
The beauty of sitting around a campfire is that you can tell long stories, right? And you can add lots of color and texture. And I was just reminded, I was giving a talk a couple of weeks ago, and one of my dear friends, Todd Offenbacher, stands up, and he's a Tahoe legend, kind of, one of the most passionate people about life and being outside. And Todd stood up to introduce me before I gave my book talk, and he reminded me, he was part of one of the stories. We went to the Arrogach Peaks in Alaska to do a new route with Tommy Caldwell and Hayden Kennedy and a great group of guys, Tommy Thompson and Dane Henry. And we were doing it for Discovery Channel. So we were the subjects of the show. It was a show called Flying Wild Alaska, about bush pilots in Alaska. And so, the film crew followed us up until the bush plane dropped us off, and then we skied in, 20 miles into these, maybe as remote as you can get in Alaska during the winter. It was minus 20, and it was,
brutal,
crazy, really wild, real adventure. And, there's grizzly bears all over. And so I was reminded, Todd introduced me, and he told this funny piece of the story that never made it into the book. But we brought, for our protection, we brought this giant handgun, and we brought 50 rounds of ammunition. But everything was human powered. So, once we got dropped off, we were towing sleds, and we had these heavy sleds. And the last night that we were in our base camp, we had to skin out another 20 miles with heavy sleds. And so anything that was extra weight, we wanted to lose it. And so, a lot of whiskey got consumed. And we had 50.
Because you didn't want to carry it out.
Yeah, we didn't want to carry it out. That's right. You didn't want to carry it out. And so, we had 50 rounds of ammo. And we saw bear tracks, but we never were confronted by a bear. And so we decided, after a little whiskey was consumed, that we could definitely shoot, 44 of the rounds and have, 6 remaining in the gun. And so, for an hour or so, we stood in this remote campground, started as just trying to hit stuff, and then, we're shooting behind our heads and, under. And it's, and we shoot 44 rounds of ammo because it's pretty heavy,
Yeah.
That's our rationale. And the next morning, and we're feeling pretty good about our decision, a little hungover the next morning, and we start skinning out. It's going to hurt no matter what. Like when you skin
that
20 plus miles, it's pulling sleds, it's brutal. And we're skinning out, and we're 8 hours into our day, and everyone has their head down. It hurts everyone the same amount. Everyone's fit. And Tommy Caldwell is up ahead of us. He's like leading the group, and the guy in front is working the hardest because they're putting in the track.
Yep.
And Tommy's an animal. He's in like beast mode as he's doing this. And all of a sudden we hear he screams like a girl, does this shriek like, ah! And we see him unclip from his sled, and he's kind of far enough out that we don't know what's happening. And he comes skinning back to us really fast, and he says, "There's a huge grizzly bear." And we're in this narrow slot canyon. We have to get out because there's going to be a plane the next day. And, all of a sudden, this idea of shooting 44 rounds, we're looking for this pistol, and all of a sudden, we have this huge revolver. And you also realize, like, what do you do with this revolver now? You have like your ski pants, and it's like tucked in but falling down your leg. And all of a sudden, we get as close as we possibly can. And Todd is he's the guy that actually knows how to operate a pistol in our group. The rest of us are clueless. And all of a sudden, we all want to just be right next to Todd. It's sort of anyone falling behind. I remember Hayden Kennedy's skin was falling off one of his skis. And, he screamed, "Wait for me, you guys." And he's like shuffling. Yeah, he's just. And we skied up to where Tommy left his sled, and a grizzly bear had literally just killed, I believe it's a caribou, had killed a caribou and had, panicked when Tommy skied up. And so the bear had mostly covered the caribou with snow, but was clearly in the bushes someplace. And it was, now it's getting late in the day. And it was the most terrifying ski out because we have this, 6 rounds of ammo, 5 or 6 of us in a line. And we just skied past this fresh
carcass,
kill.
yeah.
Yeah, and so, I don't know why that story comes to mind because there's a great essay in the book about that trip and about Hayden Kennedy and what an incredible person he is and lessons learned on the wall. But that's the beauty of adventure, real adventure, where the outcome's uncertain, is that there's layers to stories, and I think that's what I get so much joy out of is long form storytelling. You can tell the bullet story, you can tell the bear story, you can tell and the story that's in the book.
Well, it was truly remarkable. I also want to say thank you so much for page 269, chapter 54. A little shout out to your experiences here at Creative Live. Thanks so much for including us in your magically crafted book. So I appreciate that. And for the folks who pick it up, read that. But thank you very much for that, man. It was a great nod.
No, I meant it. I mean, I think what you've done with Creative Live is really special. And I really took pride in writing that chapter because I in the most complimentary way. And for those of you at home that read that chapter, I think it's a pretty accurate description of this guy that's sitting next to me, who's a genius and who is passionate. I hope it makes you laugh, actually. I hope
it does. And, you've done some really magical stuff with Creative Live, a couple of classes, one with Red Bull, where we were like live streaming some of the world's best action sports or snowboarders, and you were photographing them on the summit of North Star live on the internet. That was like 5 years ago or something like that. That was crazy. You've made so many, you've taught so many great lessons on Creative Live, and you're a mainstay in the hallway here. I mentioned that you were coming today for this, and people started scurrying around and like cleaning the place. Like, is it going to be good enough for Corey? We got to make sure he's happy here. But just thank you so much for saying kind things, and I have a ton of respect for you and your work. And this book is a huge win. It's so many stories, not just about photography, but about life and about being a creator. And you have this really, it's like so consumable. It really is so relatable. And for that, you have accomplished something that 99.99% of books don't accomplish. So
well, thanks, Chase.
Shout out. And then as a sort of closing here, I wanted to ask you, with everything that you've accomplished, you've hinted in this in our conversation today about diversifying. You talked about wanting to do things where you weren't risking your life and still wanting to push the boundaries because that's part of your personality. You talked about expanding your footprint with your production company. What part of this are you doing for like growth in and of itself? I think so many people, they just get on a path and that's what they do. But there's this insatiable sort of hunger for exploration and new horizons. And you just said, like, it's only an adventure if you truly don't know the outcome. And none of us know the outcome of our lives. But what is next for you as you expand your footprint? Is it more books? Is it, are you going to teach more? Because you basically have this, one of the many things I admire about you, you've mastered still photography, you've mastered storytelling, you've mastered, making short films, you've mastered capturing these stories in the form of a book. Your new company is doing well, 15 employees, like you can go 100 directions. How do you decide what to do? So many people want to follow you and they also want to take a cue because they're at a crossroads in their life. How in the hell, what would Corey do? WWCD.
Yeah, I mean, I can't take credit for that line, adventures where the outcome's uncertain. I had a mentor, one of the great climbing pioneers, Tom Frost. Tom was the co-founder of Patagonia with Yvon Chouinard. And
he's got a blurb on the back of the book. Yeah,
and Tom is no longer with us. Tom has, passed away late in his life, but he was a genius. I mean, he was really a gifted photographer, but also a pioneer and an entrepreneur. And that's always stuck with me, that line from Tom, that, adventures where the outcome's uncertain. And I guess that's something that where I'm the least creative and when I'm the least happy is when it feels like Groundhog Day.
Yeah.
When I'm I've done it and I'm doing it again, and it's, repetition. I've learned that about myself, that I need fresh experiences. Because I'm the best version of myself when they're fresh experiences. If I'm getting pushed and I'm having to learn and I'm sort of, I don't have the answer at the onset, that's kind of the key for me. And so, what's next? I know what it won't be. It won't be something that I've already done. It will be, trying to. I think I'm pretty excited about doing kind of more feature style doc work. But I'm also a realist in that I know I can't drop everything else that I'm doing and focus wholeheartedly.
Do you love pain? Because doing something for the first time I love doing things for the second and third times.
Yeah.
Fourth and fifth starts to get tired. First, super painful. It's like Tommy Caldwell breaking trail.
Yeah, that's good. I've never thought about it that way. I guess I think you're right. It's probably the sweet spot is like 3 or 4 times in. The first time hurts.
Yeah.
This was an anomaly. It was
having joy creating the book.
I did a book 20 years ago and it was painful. It was really painful. So maybe I should own that. That was really painful 20 years ago and I learned a ton. So yeah, I think I do like the pain of the first experience because you're so alive in that experience. The second time you're smarter, the third time like you've kind of got it down and now it's about excellence. And I always say that's why we get hired as professionals. It's not, I'm conscious of this all the time. I can point at 100 photographers and filmmakers that are way more gifted than me. I just see their raw talent oozing out. But that's only one part of why you get hired. You get hired also because we've made all of the mistakes and they're hiring you to not make a mistake. Mm-hmm. And so, I think the answer to the question is, I just love doing stuff that's new. And I think you might have identified something. I should pay you for some therapy time.
That's right.
I think I do like suffering a little bit. I think I really like the misery of the first experience. And once it's too comfortable, I need to find some new misery or new suffering.
But that's about testing yourself. That's like the passion of engaging all of your skills. And, explorers, they have that as I think of Mike Horn crossing the Arctic in winter. Like, bro, you got it good. You're sponsored by Mercedes.
Right.
Like, you could probably just tool around the South China Sea as I have with you on your sailboat in the name of adventure and find a way to like get plastic out of the ocean. But 70 days in the dark below 40 below.
Right.
Really? Is that like you're choosing to do that? To lose the tip of your nose and half of your fingers? And
the more we do this stuff, the more you do what you love, it's the more it takes to surprise you. I like being surprised. Yeah. That's part of it. It's sort of, I love the unknown. And I'm just going to bring it back to photography for a second. I love when I go on a job and like something doesn't go right or as planned and you have to adapt. And that's like my favorite thing in the world is the sort of the spontaneity and the adapting, and it's pressure, but it's like I performing under that pressure is really fun. And I think that's why kind of intuitively I'm always looking for that next thing, is because it forces, just forces me into the best version of me.
Yeah, there's something that's coming to mind as you say that, as the lens that I've learned to live through, is it's not about avoiding mistakes. If you can get comfortable, like my wife will lose her mind if I'm going to speak in front of 10 or 15,000 people. She's backstage with me. Like, I've got noise canceling headphones on. I'm literally dancing back there, and bobbing and weaving, and she's pasty white, staring at the backside of that curtain, just going like, oh my gosh. And there's a belief, and I don't always know, I'm nervous, but it's the belief that it's not about avoiding mistakes, it's about recovering from errors.
Right.
And that, like, what can you rely on in a previous experience where when this happened, you did this, and whether it's the bear or the climbing incident or managing the client, or I wonder if that resonates with you at all, like this ability to trust yourself.
I feel like a version of that has come out of this book tour. I've always enjoyed sharing and teaching. It's why I've been involved with Creative Live. And in a book tour, you have good book tour stops and you have bad book tour stops. And maybe the greatest gift of this book tour was like the bad book tour stop. Because it was really uncomfortable. It was really uncomfortable, and I bombed, and I got nervous, and that's unlike me. Like, I'm comfortable speaking, but I walked away from. It was in Boulder, Colorado. It was like the publisher warned me. They said, "Don't commit to doing bookstores. That was their number. They said bookstores are like, they're just tough. Like bookstores are tough. But I was like dead set on let's fill this one day in the middle of the calendar because I was already traveling. And I knew as soon as I walked into this bookstore, that everyone's heart was in the right place. But I walked in and I realized, they want an author. There was a wooden chair, like a rocking chair, the classic wooden chair.
My God.
And it was up on the stage. And I said, oh, but I'm going to show pictures. Like I'm going to do a talk to pictures. And they said, oh, no problem. We have a screen. And out came a screen that was like twice the size of this table, sort of. And I just instantly, and then
this is like an episode of The Office. What's happening here.
And the projector wasn't working, and but 150 people showed up, or 100 people, and I got so nervous that I'm like, it's a recipe for failure right now. Like these folks want me to sit in a chair and read, chapters out of my book with a pipe in my mouth, and I'm ready to stand up and show slides and entertain people, and I was telling my stories. It was still early in the book tour, and I was still kind of getting my story down. And then partway through the talk, the woman in the back is saying, like, wrap it up. And I'm thinking, I'm just
getting started.
Yeah, I'm just getting started, right? Yeah, didn't you get the memo? This is going to be an hour. And I wrapped it up early, and I remember just, I'm just sweating and feeling awkward. But the great lesson was I realized, no, I just own it. Moving forward, that was like the low point. But the lesson was, no, I know what I'm talking about. It doesn't matter how big the screen is. I don't even need the pictures. I can stand there and tell stories. It's me and the people sitting in this audience, and I'm here to tell stories. They're here to listen to stories. The other thing I learned is it helps if everyone has alcohol. The bookstore didn't have alcohol, and I realized, I think the next night, it might have been Seattle REI, like the next night, and that was like the opposite. It was like a packed venue, and people were psyched. And
I remember I was so bummed I was out of town for it. I knew you were going to crush it.
And it was, it was just that lesson in you've got to fail occasionally.
Yeah.
Like you've got to kind of bomb it. And I don't know, in the eyes of the folks sitting in that audience, it probably wasn't a bomb. It was just sort of lackluster what I did up there. But that's kind of why people crave doing new things, is you kind of want to get as close to that edge so that occasionally you like bomb, and then
keeps you straight.
Yeah,
right?
and then you have that experience, right? It's like, okay, that won't happen again. Like I was just sitting on a plane, Chase. You'll appreciate this. I was flying home to Reno, and flying into Reno, usually I have like one connection from LA or San Francisco, and the guy sitting next to me was, he was works for one of these huge event planning companies where, when they want to get together 100 CEOs, they're the company that builds out these events, and, they put them, and we got to talking in the last 20 minutes of the flight, and I said, so you must bring in pretty amazing presenters. We got on the presenter, motivational speaker talk, and they're hiring the biggest players in the world, and he's explaining, Seinfeld, and we just bring everybody in. And he said, Obama's now on the market. Like, you can get Obama, like he's freshly on the market. And I asked, because I think still this Boulder event was in my head of bombing, and I said, so, these guys get getting paid huge money, and he shared the numbers, and, it's for 40 minutes, and they fly in and do their shtick and get back in the plane and fly back out. And I said, do these guys ever bomb? And he said, no. He said, no, at this level, you don't bomb. And it hit me all at once. It's because they already did 20 years ago, right? Somewhere along the line, it's the same way you talk about photography. It takes a lot to surprise you. You've been there, you've done that. That's how it works for Seinfeld. Like, he's stood on enough stages. That's, Obama did it for, in his presidency. And it was a good lesson for me to hear this guy say, no, at that level, you don't bomb. It's always, might be better one night, but you don't bomb at that level. And it's kind of, that's the goal in a craft like photography or filmmaking. You don't bomb at a certain level. It's just sometimes you're good and sometimes you're great. You're always striving for great.
Well, thank you so much for being great on the show tonight, and so grateful that you made the journey. We always love you having you here on the show and on the Creative Live stage anywhere. Always welcome, 100%, no questions asked. You get the itch. We're happy to collaborate, and congratulations on the book. For those, again, Stories Behind the Images, Corey Rich. It's about photography, but it's about so much more. What's the best, any coordinates you want to steer people towards?
You know, the easiest is just go to Amazon.
Yeah.
And we also have a website, storiesbehindtheimages.com. And I'm happy to sign any books in the lead up to the holidays. So if you want it signed, go to storiesbehindtheimages.com. If you just want it to get to your house, go to amazon.com.
Yeah. You're not Amazon? No?
No.
Appreciate you being on the show, bud. Thanks so much. And look forward to the next one already. Appreciate you.
Thanks, Chase.